Hi there, it's Kevin with the Rogue Deck Builder here with the top 10 cards that I want to brew from Bloomburrow. Now, I try to do these with every set release. I know I've missed a few in the not-so-recent past, but I think with standard rotating, it is going to breathe a breath of fresh air to the format, and hopefully that I can get back into playing standard and brewing and get back to the good old glory days of the Rogue Deck Builder channel. So, I'm going to give you a promise. I will be doing a brew. I'm not sure if there will be gameplay with all of these cards, but I'm definitely going to be brewing a deck for each one of these cards. So be looking forward to a follow-up video for the cards I've chosen here, and let's see how far they can take them. I think that I need to get back to my roots of not necessarily creating the most competitive deck ever, but at least trying to see how fun and how far we can go with interesting cards from Magic the Gathering. I think that is important. I think that we get into this routine of the spiky cards and only playing Sheoldreds that we forget the beauty of Magic, which is the synergies and the combinations and everything you can do. So hopefully I can bring that back to life. That's what started this channel, is trying to do crazy wonky things, and I think I kind of lost the plot over the years and kind of lost the love, in all honesty. So anyway, before I start rambling in Kevin's fashion, let's get over into my list of cards. So starting out at number 10, we can't have a top 10 list card with at least not mentioning a Soul Sisters card. This is going to be Essence Chandler. If you are a longtime fan of the channel, you know that I owe so much to Soul Sisters. Now, it's probably not a deck that is playable in Modern whatsoever, and unfortunately, there are no Soul Sisters in Pioneer. This is what's really ticking me off about Wizards of the Coast, is they've upped the power level of so many cards in the not-so-recent past for Standard, Pioneer, and whatnot, but they refuse to create Soul Sisters that are mirrored. What I mean by mirrored is gaining life on your opponent actually casting a creature. So that's what made Soul Sisters so strong, is it was very good against aggressive decks, pumped up your own creatures when your opponents played cards and when you played cards. Unfortunately, they haven't brought these type of cards back into Standard or back into Pioneer, and it just makes me shake my head, because in the 2024, I don't think it's that powerful of a mechanic. It's always the non-mirrored Soul Sisters, and oftentimes they cost 2 mana. But anyway, I digress. Essence Chandler is so low on my list because I can't remember the card that just rotated from Crimson Vow, but I think Crimson Vow's Soul Sister or Johnny's Pridemate type card is actually better than this Essence Chandler. However, this one is interesting. It's a 2/1 for 2 mana, and if you lost life, it gains Flying and Vigilance, which is relevant in like what usually makes Soul Sisters type decks good, is they're very strong against aggro based decks, and they can actually scale well against mid-range. So and then if you build them properly, they can actually do well against control, because you can play some kind of trump cards that can get back cards from graveyards. So my history with Soul Sisters, I found the perfect balance of it, and is able to compete very well in a control and mid-range heavy Modern at the time, or tempo heavy time. So if you know the history of the channel, I actually won a PTQ with Soul Sisters, and it got me a Pro Tour invite. So whenever there is a Soul Sisters card, it's like catnip to me. So this one is definitely cool. It's definitely like a strict upgrade, I would say, to Johnny's Pridemate, which used to be a mainstay in the Soul Sisters strategy. So in this one, whenever you gain life, you put a +1 as a counter on it. So that's very similar to Johnny's Pridemate. And then when this one dies, you can actually attach it onto another creature, which is really, really cool, because typically they're going to kill this. And unfortunately, well, actually, fortunately, a lot of the exile type cards rotated out of Standard, so maybe cards will actually die again in Standard, which is going to be really cool for this particular card. Is it going to be viable? Again, they're the 1-drop game life card rotated, as well as some of the other support pieces for gaining life. This set did add a lot of gaining life, but it's a little more awkward, especially with the quote-unquote Soul Sister being a 2-drop. However, like I said, I have to mention the Soul Sister card if it is printed in a set. So then on the next one, we are on to our number 9. Our number 9 is going to be Ral Crackling Wi. I think this one would be higher up on my list, but there are so many people that are already brewing with this card, and it just seems bonkers good. This spell slinging is another one of my favorite type of strategies. If you go back to my very first video on the Rogue Deck Builder, it was a spell slinger type video of trying to make epic experiment work, and Ral Crackling Wi feels very similar to that card. It's a 4 mana for a 4 loyalty planeswalker, but whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you put a loyalty counter on Ral, and then you can create a 1/1 blue and red otter creature token with prowess that can hopefully protect Ral for a turn. And I think this is where you want to go with this card. You +1 it up to 5. You want to start casting non-creature spells to get it up to 10 as quickly as possible, and as soon as you get up to 10, you draw 3 cards and get an emblem. Instant sorcery spells, you have Storm. Once you have Storm, that's your game plan. You storm off and win. win. And if not, at least in like standard, getting up to ult, I think that's just so much value off of your cards at that point. So what I like about this too is it does trigger off of non-creature spells. It doesn't have to be instant or sorcery spells. There's some interesting ones right now in standard. We get a new kind of cantrippy artifact that goes and gets a basic land and then draws a card, which would work well with this card. And there are plenty of cantrip type cards. So we still have, do we have opt-in standard? We have a lot of those type of cards. Consider just rotated out, I believe. But we do have plenty of options for one and two drop spells and reduction of spells in this set that can kind of make this sort of strategy work. So I'm a kind of fan of this card. Like I said, it'd probably be higher up on my list if there weren't already so many people brewing around this card. On to my number 8. So my number 8 is going to be the GEV Scaled Scorch. This is more of my competitive card. I'm not the biggest fan of aggro. I am a fan of like aggro synergy though, and making a lizard tribal, of course, seems fun. If you know anything about my childhood, I had a lizard growing up. His name was Gorath. He was an iguana, so I've always loved lizards. I'd go catch them in the hills, and I'd like to say I'm not like this temperamental person or, oh, I'm, people that get into things because of themes, but gotta give the exception to lizards here. This is also a strong card. It's a 3/2 for 2 mana with ward, pay 2 life, which is very pivot. This is really, they're gonna have to remove this guy because he's gonna do so much. They're not gonna be able to wait for a board wipe, so this is going to get 2 life. Or unless they have a sacrifice base effect, Liliana's still in the format, yes, a few other sacrifice base effects, but this is hopefully going to get the 2 life for at least eating a removal spell. Other creatures you control enter with additional +1/+1 counters on them for each opponent who lost life this turn, so in a 1v1 format, just a +1/+1 counter, which is good. That's really solid on a 2 mana spell. And whenever you cast a lizard spell, it deals 1 damage to target opponent. So that's what I like about this particular, it's a legendary creature, so you can have 2 of them out, but it doesn't feel too bad just to cast a second copy, or when this eats a removal spell, gets what it wants, and then you can play the other one. That really feels good. Another thing I like about this is it does target with the 1 damage to target opponent. It doesn't say each opponent loses 1 life, which is kind of awkward. You'd think they'd actually put that in this text, but that means it actually triggers crimes. So there are a lot of cards that don't target that actually end up being not as good in this particular meta because of crimes mattering. So this guy can commit a crime. So I don't know, there's a 3-drop that really synergizes. I know there's a lot of 1-drops that synergize, but like a black-red crime-based strategy, I think this is pretty decent for sure in a 2-drop. Alrighty, so on to my number 7 card. My number 7 card is going to be the Doorport Mage. This is a 2 mana 1/3 whenever 1 or more other creatures you control leave the battlefield without dying, draw a card, and then you can bounce a card instant speed back to your hand. So these type of strategies I think are very fun, kind of the flicker strategy, bounce type strategies. And this guy I think will be a nice little enabler, especially if you can get 2 or 3 of them going. That is where you start getting the card advantage. Will that type of tempo strategy work? It hasn't in a long time in standard with this hyper aggro and hyper control. And then you have tracks in the mix that really make it so you have to finish out the game pretty quickly versus those type of strategies. However, it is a really fun brew round card, and that's the focus of this particular list. And I think the possibilities are endless. You have a lot of blink effects that exist right now in standard. You have a lot of return effects that exist right now in standard. And there's a lot of ones that were actually printed in this set. So it's the most interesting one that I think I found out of these. A lot of other, like I said, flicker type effects that are cool with frogs. I mean, that's the entire focus of this is, the bounce. They really took the bounce theme and ran with it in this set. But this is the coolest one for sure. All right, on it to my number 6. My number 6 is going to be another frog. This is Helga, Skittish Seer. This one seems bonkers. I think it's a matter of time before someone breaks it because it seems very similar to Up the Beanstalk. Whenever you cast a creature spell with mana value 4 or greater, you draw a card, gain a life, and put a +1/+1 counter on it. So Up the Beanstalk does replace itself immediately, which is what pushes it over the top. This seems like a more fair Up the Beanstalk. It doesn't trigger off of any spell, just creatures. But this card, even in standard, you can think of the crab right now that gets reduced by instant and sorcery speeds. Not the best analogy. You'd want probably a creature-based deck, so anything that reduces based upon tribal or how many creatures you have out. That's where this one seems pretty good, is if you can get some... I mean, Hauled One comes to mind, like Affinity-type builds, where you can just draw through basically your deck at that point by casting cards that have converted mana cost greater than 4, but they're being reduced, and then getting this guy big. So adding the mana of any color to spend it to cast creature spells is kind of cool too. honestly, it's not as broken on, like, really looking at this. It's not just really how to build it, but again, this is what I really like when they create cards, is cards that just aren't automatics. You know, you're gonna throw it with this particular strategy. It'll take people some brewing to figure out the best cards to go with this particular card, and just great value. I think I don't know, the body's pretty good, the 1/3. I think they could have gone like a 1/4 just so it could survive a lot of removal right when it comes down. But once it gets going, though, the Gaining Life has some synergy with plenty of cards. The +1 counters also has, you know, tons of synergy. This card is just screams synergy with other type of cards. So again, fun card to try to break, to try to make the best deck possible. That's going to be the project for this particular card. On to my number 5. My number 5 is going to be the Season of Loss. Now, you're going to see a lot of black cards coming up. I think they just knocked out of the park with black cards in this set. I didn't find a lot of green cards. There were just a lot of kind of ran themselves cards in green. But for as far as black is concerned, there's plenty of cards I could have picked for this top 5 here. The Season of Loss is really interesting to me. It's a 5 mana, and you can choose up to 5 worth of modes. Each player sacrifices a creature for just 1 paw. You can draw a card for each creature control that died, and then each opponent loses X life or X number of creature cards in your graveyard. So I like this because it can be a finisher and like a strategy of a self-mill, but what I really like with the modes here is just on 3, each player sacrifices 3 creatures, and then you draw basically 3 cards at that point. And this is exactly what these type of strategies really want, especially in a 5-drop. This is the perfect curve by getting 3 value creatures out and then wiping the board and getting value off of those creatures. So what I'm seeing with this particular set is there's a lot of enablers, and I'll be showing another one later on in this list, where one of my favorite strategies in Magic the Gathering is creatures that die and get some sort of a residual effect to then be reused later on. So one of my most popular decks ever was a Immortal Servitude deck. It was actually showcased on the Wizards of the Coast website. At one point, I had a pretty good run with it, and it just ran a lot of low-value creatures that replaced themselves, got sort of some value, and then you could use some sort of spell to get a lot more value out of them. So they double dip, triple dip at that point, and this particular card really seems like that's what it wants to do. So you play some creatures that create treasures or draw cards or force your opponent to sacrifice something or make a food, that type of thing, and then you Season of Loss, and then you get even more value with them dying by redrawing, and then if you have some sort of way to reanimate them, rinse and repeat. That's the whole strategy. That's the whole tempo, the whole point of the deck. And they've been some of my favorite strategies in my career of Magic the Gathering, and it's exciting to have. This one just seems so perfect with its modes, because it can be used as a finisher later on if you are in this like self-mill or just the deck that I mentioned. If you go back, and I think they called it like Black Cat combo, which is crazy because I ran like one Black Cat on Magic's website, but I didn't run a lot of ways to fill up the graveyard. The way that filled up the graveyard was naturally my creatures just chump blocking and dying or being used as resources for other things. And so that is exactly what I'm seeing in this card. You're playing those cards that get value, want to go to the graveyard, and then a card like this that forces your opponent to get rid of Sheldreds and really bonkers creatures at that point. So really loving this card. On to my number 4. My number 4 is going to be good old Iridescent Vine Lasher. So with this and Billy, good old Billy the Cactus from Outlaws at Thunder Junction, we still have Nissa in the mix. Yes, we're losing all the lands that sacrifice themselves and gain life when they come into play. However, we have Fabled Passage, we still have Evolving Wilds, and I believe there still are a few other cards that do sack themselves. I think that this kind of strategy is still alive and well. Kind of the Splendid Reclamation did rotate, but you still have the creature that does it. You get a new legendary creature that gets all your lands from your graveyard back into play. I believe there's still a few others in Standard that aren't rotating, and the Iridescent Vine Lasher just seems great because it comes out on turn number 1 or on turn number 3 when you're not really doing much with that whole strategy at that point, and you can start to get that damage in, and then you can recycle. I mean, just the curve with this and Billy, like a 1/2, and then you have these aggressive packages, and I'm really liking this card. I think that maybe they should have given it like maybe Death Touch or something to make it so it could at least have that threat of chump blocking. But it's an interesting card with the landfall triggers. I've always been a fan of kind of the landfall type strategy, and this is just fill up your graveyard with a ton of lands, and this guy will poke, and it won't take long before the life total is very, very low. And again, like I say, I see a pretty good curve going on right now with like Nissa and Billy in this, and you still have the entire Jun shell of the landfall deck that exists in Standard, and so it'll be definitely not as broken as it was before with the new Capenna lands and some of the enablers from that point in time. But I definitely think that these type of cards give it like this new way of attacking the board, which will be very interesting. On to my number 3. My number 3 is going to be the Bandits Talent. This is another strategy that has been quite popular as a brew strategy for me in the past. I've been doing this for 10 years now. So Waste Not was one of my favorite cards ever printed, and this feels very similar to that type of strategy. So like the Rack, what were the other cards that used to go in kind of the discard-based strategies? So when it enters the battlefield, each opponent discards 2 cards unless they discard a non-land card. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, if that player has fewer than 2 cards in hand, they lose 2 life. So it's just an easy 1 mana to upgrade it to the next one. And then 4 mana at the beginning of your draw step, draw an additional card for each opponent who has 1 or fewer cards. So I like the modules on this because it's basically doing a 3-in-1. What you're really wanting this to do is just have your opponent discard a card. And 2 mana is not terrible. Like, they can discard 2 cards. They probably won't. 2 lands if they want. They have to discard basically a non-land, or otherwise they're getting rid of a land. 2 lands. That's how it works. And then you'll start to rack them on level 2. So the whole strategy of these type of decks is you want to get rid of their hand as soon as possible, and then deal with any threats that come out later. And then you just basically tax them, tick them down. And this one's really cool because oftentimes the deck has problems with keeping up with card advantage with your opponent, and so the level 3 on this works, and the level 2 is the finisher, so this one does it all in one. And so I think that it's good in multiples too. I'm thinking this is really a card that synergizes quite well with Liliana. You have another card that was printed out of this set that just has your opponent discard a card with flashback, and also has them discard a card. So it's going to be you still have the bat that eats a card. You still have the card that, I'm trying to think of the Outlaws of Thunder Junction, special guest, the aftermath type. Whenever your opponent discards a card, you create a clue token. Those particular cards, I think it's just a perfect curve right now. And then you tack in some board wipes, you tack in some removal. You have everything you need for this particular deck. So this is probably the first deck that I'll be definitely kind of fooling around with, is either like a mono black or something along that lines of having Bandits Talent be the finisher. Between Bandits Talent and Liliana, I think you have it all covered. On to my number 2. My number 2 is going to be the Scavenger's Talent. Now, this one's very interesting. It is a bit of a mana suck to get where you want it to be. So the first mode is whenever 1 or more creatures you control die, you create a food token. And this is the card I'm talking about with the value off of things dying. Whenever you sacrifice a permanent, target player mills 2 cards. So it's kind of weird with that. You're probably going to be milling yourself at that point. But I could see this actually, after a while, if you establish milling your own graveyard, bringing things back, and then you can actually start milling your opponent out. That could be a strategy. And then the level 3 is where I'm really interested at the beginning of your end step. Yeah, you may sacrifice 3 other non-land permanents. If you do, return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter on it. So it can't affect your opponent's graveyard, right? That's weird because it says target player mills. I wish they would have had that module on there. Because then you could get some bonker stuff out of your opponent's graveyards, like Atraxes and stuff. So you probably do want to have something worthwhile in your mix, but this feels like, what is the card out of Eldraine? The -3/-3, and then you cast it as an enchantment. During your upkeep, you get a card back from your graveyard. That card is very tough to beat for many decks, and this one also feels like it. Same thing, that you're going to get some value, and I mean the food token is nothing to joke at either. 3, so non-land permanents, you're going to get the food tokens, treasure tokens, blood tokens are gone now. That would be perfect for this, but clue tokens, things like that. That's where I'd brew around this, is creatures that leave something behind for them to then utilize to get back creatures from your graveyard. But even the first 2 modules I think are great. But so this is what I like about these 2 classes, these talents that I've showcased in this top 10, is I think that they, some of them are really overcosted. I like most of them they printed in the set. There are a couple that barely missed my list. However, I think that the ones that I've showcased here, they're the best bang for their buck, and all the modes are so useful. So this is a card that is very interesting, and I'm going to definitely have fun trying to find a good home for this sucker. And then on my number 1, this card just screams synergy to me. And I have a lot of ideas for it. And this is the Whisker Veil Forerunner. Now, it is very, very high cost. Now, you say 4 mana, that's not high cost, Kevin. Well, in a world of Sheoldreds, in a world of board wiping everything in turn 4 and turn 5, oftentimes you want these cards to come out turn 2, turn 3. However, the Forerunner seems really fun. So whenever it becomes a target of a spell or ability you control for the first time each turn, you look at the top 5 cards of the library and reveal a creature card with mana value 3 or less from among them and put on the battlefield. If it's your turn. If you don't, you put it in your hand and put the rest on your bottom. So the key word here is Valiant is not quite heroic. It's worse and better in the same thing because it works off of abilities, not just spells. And so we still have the 1-drop that gives protection from any color, the Phyrexian, can't remember, the Skrillex or something like that, Skrill something. But those type of cards, I think, make this card bonkers. So it's a renewable resource to continue to get more value, and especially if those particular, a lot of these creatures, like, too bad like Kamigawa Channeling is rotating, but there have been cards that have discard abilities or even enter the battlefield effects that you can target your creature, and those things start to compound themselves. And as you can see, I'm a synergy player. I love things that replace themselves. I love grindy games. That's my favorite way to play Magic. And Whisker Veil Forerunner seems like the coolest card to find the best 60 to showcase the power of this card. And that's kind of the focus of Rogue Brews, and the focus of, like, all roads lead to Sheoldred. A lot of times that's what we like to say with like these particular cards where it's like, oh, I'd play this 4-drop, but Sheoldred is just so much better. And I get that, and I think there's even a 4-drop white card that is going to be the new Sheoldred for white, which just has basically modes that are always going to be useful. However, personally, I still like to come up with decks with subpar cards that might not be Sheoldreds, but if you can get them in the right shell, maybe you could push it over the top from Sheoldred, and that's what I'm kind of thinking about, like Whisker Veil Forerunner. I think that you can build a deck where it's the top of your curve. Everything has a lot of synergies with being targeted, like more other Valiant cards and cards that actually do target, and you can actually create this cool little tempo-based strategy that's resilient to board wipes and removal, and can actually push through against mid-range strategies and aggro strategies and whatnot. So again, we'll have to wait and see if a card like this can compete in a, like, Boros is still around. Mono red is still probably very healthy. There's other aggro decks, and like mono black's looking pretty strong, and the control still seems incredibly strong. So of course this might not have a fit, but in the scope of brewing, the whole mentality of brewing, I think this is the best. This is the most fun card to really theory craft around from the set. So there you have it from my top 10 list. I'm definitely looking forward to your ideas and your top 10 lists. And like I said, I am committing to building a deck. I want to come out with a daily brew series where it's just showcasing a deck, not necessarily. I think the time-consuming part a lot of time is actually playing Magic the Gathering. We'll be trying to revive Tuesday Brews Days. We'll actually be playing Magic on like Arena, but I think it's more fun to me actually brew the decks, and then we can vote on maybe some decks that you want to see me actually play. I got out of the habit of actually even doing gameplay. I lost my love for making Magic videos, many years ago. Really the release of Arena, where it forced me out of MTGO and into Arena, and I just hated the Arena client. I think that was the beginning of the end of Rogue Deck Builder, of where I just really stopped enjoying playing Magic, because Magic Online was such a better client than Arena, and I just couldn't justify trying to. The aesthetics that were so terrible from online. I'm really regretting even going away from online and making the jump into Arena. But it is what it is. It's water under the bridge at that point, and so somehow I need to find my love for brewing. I think it'd be interesting to see how I've aged, how my philosophies have changed, and whatnot, if I can even go back to those days of Rogue Deck Builder. But I think it's really cool of all those who stuck around over the year. I still get messages of like, man, I watched you in 2014 and you used to be I used to love your brews and stuff. So we'll see where it goes. This is a good fresh start with standard rotating, and I think that I'm gonna definitely give it a go and see how long it lasts before I lose my love for 1v1 kind of standard format. But again, maybe we'll try to try Pioneer. Hopefully one of these days that Magic can have all the cards from Pioneer in Arena, and we can start messing around with that. I don't think I'll ever get back into Modern. It's just the power level is just too nuts for me to really enjoy. But anyway, before I start rambling on, this has been Kevin with Rogue Deck Builder. Thanks for watching.